Welcome to Galactic Grandmother Heart to Heart. My name is April, and my special guest today is Kai Craig. I invited Kai on today because he is on the cutting edge of caring for the Earth's ecology. Kai designs sustainable landscaping. He designs native gardens, edible landscaping, and really very important to the Southwest and especially to Southern California here, where we have rising water prices and cyclic droughts. He's a water conservation specialist, and he designs that into his landscaping so a minimal amount of water is needed to maintain the plants. So I'm very excited to welcome you. Thank you for taking the time, Kai.
Thanks for having me, April. It's good to be here.
I'm excited to ask you questions because I think it's so timely now. And when I was looking over your educational background, boy, you have some impressive credentials. A bachelor's from UC Berkeley in conservation and resource studies with a focus on coastal ecology, and a master's from Cal Poly Pomona in landscape architecture. And now you're working with the Long Beach Surfrider Foundation on their Ocean Friendly Gardens program. You're based in Long Beach, California, and you founded a company called California Eco Designs. And I wondered if growing up in Hawaii affected your choice of careers in any way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, growing up in the rainforest on the Big Island was just something that instilled just a lifelong connection to nature,
Uh-huh.
and finding comfort in the outdoors and connecting with nature. And it's such a dynamic place with over 200 inches of rain. I think we got there. We were about a mile and a half, I think, from the world's most active volcano, Kilauea. There were hurricanes, and it was just a wild place to grow up. So there's that connection. And then, of course, the beautiful Hawaiian culture where if the volcano was going off, it was like, oh, Madam Pele is angry today. And so there's kind of that animism to nature, that belief that it's more than the sum of just its parts and the resources it gives us. There's a force behind it that you really feel growing up on that island that's just being born all the time. And then of course that came up again later in my studies at Berkeley. I took Hawaiian ethnohistory, and that kind of led me down this path of looking at how culture really is how we have that relationship with nature, and how that affects our environment and how the environment affects us, and really determines if we're going to be able to sustain that relationship for
Mhm.
over a long time. That was pivotal.
For my audience and really for myself, could you clarify the concepts behind sustainable landscaping?
Sure. And I think, sustainable kind of came out as a term of, managing resources so that you don't erode the base that you depend on. So, like in forestry, you're not depleting the forest, you're harvesting timber thing, you're
Uh-huh.
not taking away from the base and overly extractive, and you're not causing more damage. Now, at Cal Poly Pomona, they have the Center for Regenerative Studies. And so that really influenced my landscape architecture program, where we're looking at what we call regenerative design, which kind of goes a step further in that now we're not just dealing with pristine landscapes. A lot of them are really degraded. Regenerative design is healing the landscape.
Oh, I love that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It brings to mind how cities were just thrown up, concrete everywhere, and with no regards really to the plants, the water. And now we do have to go in and start making some changes. I've heard that in your area, you've been asked by certain government agencies to help out with that, to build back into medians between roads. What have you been doing for your community?
Sure. And a good example of what you're talking about too is 20th century. We had all these problems with flooding in Los Angeles. So they decided we're going to channelize the LA River and concrete over it. So it works great from a flood control perspective, but they aren't looking at all the other functions of a river, which a lot of different functions. So looking at, taking out concrete in areas and creating places for the water to sink in, add vegetation. So that's kind of the big picture. Or we're looking at how we're going to regenerate our watershed. So a lot of my work is focused around that. It's like watershed perspective and a watershed approach with what we do on the site. Our intervention on the site is we're always looking at what is the path of water, how do we capture it and infiltrate it. And so I do a lot of work with the city of Long Beach, and we're doing median projects, and I work with their water department on a direct install garden program. So for lower income homes, they are doing drought tolerant landscaping, and they're looking at ways to conserve water because they're the
Mhm.
water department. They have to ensure people have water supply. But that's an opportunity to insert my agenda of going further to restore the watershed. And I work with the Surfrider Foundation to do their ocean friendly garden program, where we can certify the garden as meeting a set of criterion where it's going to use the watershed approach. Yeah, so that's kind of how I'm trying to plug in with what's going on in the city and the area.
We have a California turf replacement rebate for both residential and commercial. And I was going to ask you about that, where we would get rebates for actually pulling out our old lawns. Can you talk about that rebate program and perhaps what we can do in place of those old lawns?
Here in Long Beach, we've had that. I started doing this sometime in 2009, 2010. Lawn is the number one crop in America, and thousands of tons of fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides go into lawns. The lawns are great for active play, but we don't need it everywhere. It shouldn't be the default landscape, and you can reduce it to the areas where it's needed, you can manage them more organically and so on. But what you want to do, what ideally we would do is replace as much lawn as we can with the native plant communities that existed here, because California is home to about a third of the endemic species, a third of the biodiversity of at least the continental United States, as far as, and we're down to about 2% of what was here before. So we're in a biodiversity hotspot of the world. It's important, the heritage of the world's genetic diversity, that we preserve our native plants, and insects and birds that have adapted to those plants have formed a relationship over eons to work with those, and they're plants that are adapted perfectly to our climate. So, and like that's what we want to use instead, and we look to those plant communities, and that's how we design dress it. The landscaping is not just a pretty plant here and there to up your building. It's a fragment of habitat, and that actually makes a big difference. Pollinators, they need to stop and rest every quarter mile or so. So you could be the little resting spot for migratory monarchs or what have you. So there's so much going on in the world, and there's a lot of bad news in terms of the environment. But if you just stop and focus on an area, and even if you're not a homeowner, adopt a plot somewhere in your city and try to help regenerate the earth with that.
Oh, that's a great
Yeah.
idea.
Hmm.
And speaking of the insects and so forth, finding edible plants. Now, what about edible plant and edible landscaping for humans?
Yeah, I mean, that's really important, right? Puts so much resources into our landscaping, and it should be serving some function. And if it's not habitat, like it can be habitat for people, right? Like you say. And so much energy goes into moving food from around the country, around the world. So really it's saving a lot of resources if you're able to grow things at home and kind of incorporate that into your household. Recycle food scraps into a worm bin, and then the worm compost can be used on your vegetables.
You showed me a garden in particular that I was really fascinated with. And you said that because you had designed the plants and the layout, and this was in the front yard, so it was important to have a very pleasing, beautiful look to the front yard, but you had designed in a way that the water was captured. I believe it was around a tree. And what did the owner say about that?
Oh, he was really excited. He was not one drop of water like escapes my property when it rains, which is neat because it doesn't have to be something that looks engineered or anything like that. It can be completely natural, but we're always looking for ways to collect the water and slow it down and let it infiltrate. And rain barrels, for instance, are a really kind of a cool visible way to collect water off the roof, but they store some, they might be 50 gallons or something, but your roof might 1 inch storm produce 1,000 gallons of water.
Oh,
So
wow.
so the cheapest, most effective way to store water is in the ground. And so just by contouring, because we've been taught like, oh, water is so bad for our house, we got to get it away as quickly as possible. That's the same mentality that led to the LA River being paved over. So we move it away from the house, but then we have an area to collect it where it can soak into the ground. And so like a tree or plants, their roots are going to follow that water down and be able to tap into that in a drought. So it's part of the drought tolerant landscape is to be able to bank that water in the ground. It can be part of the pathway or a patio or around the trees.
And actually, that was my next question because I was wondering what we could do in a residential setting for water catchment. It just seems like we don't collect all the water I feel like we should be collecting. Is it okay just to let it run off?
I've done talks about this, but you can just create an area to collect the water and let it sink in. You want to kind of make sure that your ground can absorb the water, so because you don't want it sticking around for more than a day or two to avoid mosquitoes and that sort of thing. But really, if you have a place to direct it to, the ground is just so thirsty for water. We have so little of it that you want a place for it to soak in, and just 3 to 6 inches of just a place for it to pool up and soak in, and then you want a place for it to overflow where it can continue on, and so it doesn't back up, against your house or something. This is just the problem with our watersheds is, like you say, we've paved over so many places that a big issue that leads to all the stormwater pollution. And it's really that first flush all year long. There's pollution building up on our roofs and on our lawns and the streets. So really you're not trying to stop all the rain from going into the river. That's natural, we want that, but to have it first go through soil, to first go through vegetation, all the microbes and organisms in the soil are great at breaking down pollution. So it's not a problem that we want to solve with big treatment plants everywhere. It's everybody doing this in their yard. It's something we can all do, and hopefully next time enough people do that, you have less pollution when it rains. So the beaches are always shut down after it rains, and because of all the
Yeah.
bacteria and everything. So
Yeah.
yeah.
My son lives in Beijing, and I've traveled around China quite a bit. And I was really impressed by the fact that every available piece of land, and I'm talking about you've got your freeways, and then you've got your on ramps, and you've got little patches of land. There's corn crops, there's fruit trees, every bit of land, like around the major freeways on these little pieces of land, are planted with food. Everywhere I traveled, most people would have at least some little, even if they lived in an apartment, they'd have some little tomato plants or something. And I love the idea of not being dependent upon a commercial food chain. That's kind of a personal concern of mine. And when I think about edible landscaping and edible gardens, I really think that's something that we need to think about as incorporating into our environment.
Absolutely. And sometimes we might just be building vegetable planters where and try to incorporate that so it just works and we find a place for it. But the places you're talking about, it's kind of just woven into the fabric of everything, right? So if you have fruit trees that are also giving you your shade and everything, or we're doing one now where they're like, I eat berries every day. So we're like, okay, so we have a whole wall of blackberries and boysenberries and things, and it's also like
I'm so
security,
jealous.
right? If no one can come over that wall, they're going to fall into a berry thorn thicket. But yeah, so it can be part of everything that you're doing. And when I was in the Caribbean, every plant like had some use and it was their medicine too, like, oh, you chew this if you have a headache or
Yeah,
and it also reminds me of I had an agroecology professor who he didn't distinguish between food and medicine, right? Because our food is what gives us health. And
right.
if you start thinking about how many uses, functions, applications can our landscaping serve, that's a permaculture principle.
Mhm.
So the landscape becomes very productive. And I think COVID kind of taught us like, well, maybe we need to be a little more self-reliant on, when it comes to food and supply and chains get interrupted.
Yeah, I'll bring it back to the California turf replacement rebates. It can be quite helpful for both residential and commercial now, as far as what California will offer in rebates to help out with making your landscaping more water efficient.
Yeah, it depends on your water provider, but up here in Los Angeles area, most people are MWD, Municipal Water District, and they get $3 a square foot. About covers the turf removal portion of a
Mhm.
project. It can range 10, $15 a square foot for a project. Yeah, that's significant savings. Yeah, people are considering transitioning. I'm seeing like kind of a movement where a lot of the residences have gone through that because they see the value beyond just a hard financial benefit. They see all the other benefit and the beauty and just the feeling of right livelihood kind of thing. And now I think we're moving into more the commercial scale, the municipal scale of, okay, we're just not going to be able to water our landscapes and we can't like
Right.
just have dead grass all summer long. And it was passed in California, AB 1572, which says all non-functional turf has to be phased out. It's going to go through the city level, it's going to go through commercial, industrial landscapes. They're just not going to be allowed to have turf that isn't actively used for recreation or what have you. So yeah, that's a challenge and it's a different problem because it's not someone's garden where they're going to have like a fine gardener, someone with a horticultural knowledge to take care
Okay.
of that. It's less labor intensive, but more knowledge intensive. And our maintenance, we go out once or twice a month instead of every week cutting grass. So it's a better job. So that's one aspect. But a lot of cities, they're used to managing hundreds of acres and right on top mowers, and
Mhm.
that's how they're used to managing it. So it's hard for even the city to transition when
Mhm.
they're one agency is saying you can't do this, and the parks or public works department is saying, but this is how we do it. So that's really like I think where we're headed, and it's going to be a big scaling up.
And kind of the beginning of a transition.
Mhm.
But I know in San Diego, we just got notice, I believe last week, that our water prices were going up again.
Yeah.
The last increase was 3 years ago. I think it's important to start replacing with more native landscaping.
Yeah, and yeah, looking at your water budget, right? Like about a third of your water use usually goes towards landscaping on that, like an average home. So, and then when you go to like a drought tolerant or something, you might cut that down to a third of that. Not one strategy you could do is gray water recycling. Because,
Ooh,
like, so California has made it into code that you don't need a permit to do a laundry to landscape system. So
oh,
you can, as long as you have a diverter valve, so you can switch between the sewer and your landscape, you can have the water go out to like mulch filled basins that water like a fruit tree, as long as you don't want the water, they don't want the water being exposed to like human contact, but it just goes into a basin under some mulch and it'll water fruit trees. The fruits are up here. There's no danger of contamination or anything. So that's one way you can kind of reuse your water.
oh. And what about sink water from washing dishes and showers and stuff? Considered gray water?
That is gray water. Yeah, anything other than like the toilet, usually
Oh,
in the home, is gray water. From a sink or shower, there's a little more like treatment that has to go on, filtration, and so the gray water systems become a little bit more involved and maybe permitting. Yeah, laundry is really an easy way to
I
start.
did want to know what you would like to tell my audience that's really important to think about as far as, ecology, water conservation. I mean, what is it that you really want people to know about?
I was thinking about you and your audience, April, and what I might be especially relevant to the galactic grandmother. Um, and for me, I kind of had a realization too when I was talking to you about park project we visited, and it's like, yeah, we're healing, we're trying to like repair the earth, regenerate the earth, and that sort of thing, and that feels really good. But the earth is going to be okay after we're gone. Like if we left that place alone for 100 years, the seeds would come in and the birds would come back and everything.
Uh-huh.
It's really like ourselves that we're kind of healing through this process and reestablishing that connection. And so I think that's really what it's kind of about. And working together in our community, we connect with each other and we connect with what is our place here, and that's really what's healing to me and what I think the true motivation is. So like I said, with everything going on in the world, if you can just focus on like making what's around you a little better and being in it with the people in your community,
Mhm.
that's that's really what motivates you, and that's what's sustainable, right? Because that feeds into the next thing. It
Well,
keeps
and
it going.
that's exactly the philosophy of the so-called New Earth or higher consciousness that we're all going into, is starting on these smaller community levels and working together to not only help each other out, but to help out our environment, our community, all those people. It takes a village, and we are all brothers and sisters. We're the family of the human species. So I really appreciate that message.
Thank you. Yeah, no, you're right. We have the solutions we need. We have all the technology we need. We have the wisdom of the generations and cultures that came before us. And really it's let's tap into that. We don't need one of these, whoever our next president is going to be, to help us. Well,
Oh,
nice talking to you, April.
so much. I really appreciate your time and all the information you gave us. And I suspect I will want to do a follow-up with you in the future about what's going on with this,
Okay.
how we're
Yeah, happy to.
progressing.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds great. Anytime.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.